Good evening. Welcome to Confirmation. Pastor Anjanette here, excited to continue on with you in the story. We are in chapter 13, lucky 13, and we are focused in on this part of the story called The King Who Had It All. And we're going to talk about King Solomon. So, as is the norm, we begin this time together with prayer. So please join me in prayer. Gracious God, thank you for the opportunity to gather around your word, for this word that lifts up the time in our biblical story when King Solomon, with his wisdom and with his great calling to build a temple and his great partnership with God's people in the midst of a new season for them, is able to offer them hope. We come to you in this season of Advent, a time too when we are filled with hope for what you are building among us. May we be open in our understanding of Scripture. May we be renewed in the promises we receive in you. And may we forever place our hope in the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen. So, we have heard about King David and all of his um, great and then sometimes challenging aspects of his life, too. Not sometimes, very challenging aspects of his shadow side and ways in which he failed in some of the choices he made in life, but also how it is that he was always regarded as Israel's greatest king. And now we move into the next part of the story where we hear about his son, Solomon. And this is a great mosaic that shows King David and his son, King Solomon. And I like simply just a reminder that they are truly kings, which is a bit of a foreign concept for us because we certainly don't live in a nation with kings, but that authority is important to God's people. Here's another picture on the left of a stained glass window that features King David and then King Solomon. And you'll notice in this picture what they are holding. King David on the left holding a harp. Remember, King David, among many things, as a shepherd boy, would play songs on his harp and sing. And many of the psalms or songs recorded in the Old Testament are attributed to King David. So the harp is a reminder of that. And on the right, you see King Solomon, and he's holding what looks like a church. And really, it's a reference to the temple, which is a huge part of this story that we will share today, too, regarding one of the great things that King Solomon will always be known for is the building of the first temple. And on the right, you'll see a children's Bible depiction of the death of King David, and of course, having this moment of blessing for his son to now be ruler over God's people, Israel. So, your story starts out today in chapter 13, recounting Solomon's early years and how it is he has this moment where he is experiencing God's own self speaking to him and an opportunity to ask God for anything that he wants. Now, one of the things I hoped that Julie would send to you is in the corner here. It's a coloring page, and that coloring page looks like this. So since there's going to be a little video at the end that's longer, I want to have opportunity for you to listen and keep your hands busy and kind of stay focused. So while I'm talking, if you feel like you want to start coloring, start with this one. And here is that depiction of God coming to King Solomon in a dream and saying, what is it that you want? What would be the greatest thing you could receive? Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody asked me, I might have a whole lot of ideas of what I'd like. It's kind of like making a Christmas list, right? All the things that, oh, I could possibly have and shopping, maybe on Amazon or finding those things and putting together a list of what you hope for. So that's my question for you tonight. If the Lord came to you in a dream and told you not to make a Christmas list, but told you that you could have anything that you want, what would you ask for? I also put a quote there from Maya Angelou, which is ask for you what you want and be prepared to get it. And sometimes we lower our expectations, and certainly when it comes to God, we in prayer ask God for many things. And I think we all hope that we get what we ask for. But here in this dream that King Solomon has, he asks for, of all things, wisdom. Wisdom. Now, not just to be smart, and many of you are very smart, but he asks for wisdom. One of the great stories that we get to hear in this particular chapter is a story of wisdom. And so on the screen, I have a picture that depicts this story where two women come to King Solomon. So King Solomon's sitting up on the throne there. Kind of looks like a girl, but it's, a boy with long hair. Anyway, he is having to make a decision on the fact that there is a baby that is living and there was a baby that died. And if you remember the story, they have come to him because one of the women claims that this baby is hers, but the other woman says, no, she took my baby in the night. Her baby is the one that died. And so, which one is the mother? And King Solomon has to determine who the true mother is of the child. And so, if you remember the story, it's very dramatic. King Solomon says, well, I guess if you can't be honest with me and if you both claim this is your baby, then we're just going to have to cut the baby in half and you can each have a half a baby. Now, of course, this is absolutely horrific if you can even imagine that they would want to do something like that, let alone make an edict or an order. And so, in this particular picture that I pulled out, there's that big sword coming down. Can you imagine having this little baby like screaming and crying, and then just wanting to slice that baby in half? But you see the mother with her hand up in the drawing there and saying, "No, no," and she says, "Don't kill this baby." And Solomon, in his wisdom, says, now you are the true mother because you couldn't bear to see that baby, even if it wasn't your baby, be sliced in half, cut apart, die in front of you when that would be a needless death for selfish reasons. And so her selflessness is what, in fact, brings about this great wisdom that Solomon was right. That was the true mother. And her actions justified the gift that she was able to have in having her child returned to her. It's an awesome Bible story. Little side note, I remember my dad was a pastor, and I remember my dad did a children's sermon on this, and all I remember him saying was, cut the baby in half. And I remember thinking, that's horrible. But of course, that was, the story, right? And the ending of it. But maybe if I ever do a children's sermon on this, I might edit how I go about it so it's not quite so shocking. Anyway, so Solomon's great gift and the thing he asked for from God was wisdom. The other thing that Solomon is known for is the building of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, we don't have perhaps the same sort of temples as to what where this whole story builds up to for God's people. But we do build grand places, and probably the most recent example of that is the US Bank Stadium. Curious if any of you have been there. We went there as a Bethel staff and had a tour of the stadium, and it was really, really interesting and massive. Like I kind of had an idea how big it was, but it wasn't until I went there that I really understood like this is like a temple. I mean, this is like the Mecca of Vikings fans, right? So this might be a modern day temple. We have lots of different other examples, but I lift this up for you. Solomon's temple is one that, of course, was promised to God's people and took a long time until it was built and was incredibly important in terms of making a sacred space for the Ark of the Covenant, which you remember held the Ten Commandments. And usually that had moved around with God's people. And so to have an actual place where that was housed and a place for people to come to as their center of worship, to be in the presence of God. This was a hoped for, longed for thing. And finally, King Solomon would build this temple. Now, I want to share a video with you. It's not the story video that we normally would watch together, but this is the video that shares a little bit more about how the temple was brought together. So I'm going to try and bring this up for you. And it's about 10 minutes. And so I am going to just let it run and have you enjoy this.
Solomon's temple stood in Jerusalem for almost 400 years. It was the crown jewel of Jerusalem and the center of worship to the Lord. Almost half of the Old Testament writings took place during the time when Solomon's temple was still standing. Understanding the significance of its location, history, and design can greatly add to one's reverence for one of the most holy places in the world. The city of Jerusalem is located in an area of three major valleys: the Hinnom, the Central or Tyropoeon, and the Kidron Valley. The mountain range between the Central and Kidron Valley is called Mount Moriah. The peak of the mountain is a large protruding flat rock, which is now located under the dome of the rock. According to Genesis 22:2, Abraham was commanded to sacrifice Isaac in the region of Moriah, connecting the Temple Mount with this significant event. At the time of King David, the area of Jerusalem was controlled by the Jebusites, the city only occupying the southern part of the central ridge. When David captured the city in about 1000 BC, he made Jerusalem his capital. David then moved the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem and began preparations for building a permanent structure to replace the portable tabernacle of Moses that had been used for over 400 years. With the ancient city of Jerusalem being fairly small, David purchased the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite so he could expand the size of the city. Being higher than the city of David, the hilltop would make a beautiful place to build the temple of the Lord. Under the reign of David's son, King Solomon, the temple construction began. After 7 years of construction in about 960 BC, Solomon finished building the temple, most likely built over this same protruding rock of Mount Moriah. Solomon also built himself a new palace just south of the temple and expanded the walls of the city up towards the peak of Mount Moriah. The Temple of Solomon was modeled after the Tabernacle of Moses. Because of the many similarities between the Tabernacle and the Garden of Eden, many scholars believe that the Garden of Eden was the prototype for the Tabernacle, and thus later temples. According to Jewish tradition, Eden was located on a hill, with the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil at the center of the hill. The Bible teaches that when Adam and Eve transgressed and partook of the forbidden fruit, they were cast out towards the east. Cherubim and a flaming sword were then placed at the east entrance to prevent them from partaking of the tree of life, as they would then live forever in their sin. In order to return back into the presence of God, Israel had to symbolically retrace the steps of Adam and Eve, passing the cherubim and re-entering the garden in a westward direction. The tabernacle was set up in the same east-to-west progression, seeming to replicate the Garden of Eden. The tabernacle was divided into 3 main courts: the outer court, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. The outer court represented the fallen world, while the inner courts represented a more sacred and holier way of life. In essence, as the priest, who represented all of Israel, progressed through the tabernacle, or temple, he left the world to enter a more holy state, and then was enabled to re-enter the presence of the Lord, passing the angels, or cherubim, who were embroidered on the veil. Solomon's temple replicated this same 3-level progression, doubling the floor plan size of the tabernacle sanctuary for the temple structure. As one approached the Temple of Solomon, the first thing noticed was the brazen altar of sacrifice. The altar was 20 cubits long and wide and 10 cubits high, a cubit being the length from the elbow to the tip of the longest finger, or about 1.5 feet. On the 4 corners of the altar were 4 horns, horns often representing power. This is where the sacrificial animals were burned, representing the future sacrifice of the Savior Jesus Christ. On the southeast side of the temple was the molten or brazen sea, which rested on the backs of 12 oxen, 3 pointing in each of the cardinal directions. In ancient times, oxen represented strength, and the number 12 often represented the 12 tribes of Israel. Water from the larger brazen sea was poured into 10 bronze water basins on both sides of the temple, which could then be wheeled around the outer court for various washing and cleansing rituals by the priests. Around the south, west, and north sides of the temple were 3 floors of chambers or storage rooms. The inside wall of the chambers was stepped so as to create a ledge where the timbers of the floors could rest. The storage rooms were accessed by a door on the south side of the temple, with wooden ladders going up into each of the floors. At the front of the temple were 2 large bronze pillars that flanked the porch. The pillar on the left was named Boaz, and the pillar on the right was named Yakin. The tops were decorated with lily flower petals and pomegranates. Pomegranates were a sign of prosperity and posterity because of their many seeds, and were also found on the bottom hem of the clothing of the high priest. The main temple doors were made of 2 large bifolding doors covered in gold with cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. The Bible describes the doorframe as being a 4th part of the wall, which most scholars believe means that the door had 4 stepped frames. The interior doorway of the Holy of Holies was similar, except having 5 frames instead of 4. The priests who represented Israel were the only ones allowed into the inner temple. This means that Israel only could enter through being represented by the priests. Once you entered the main doors, you entered the holy place, a large room 40 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits tall. The room was overlaid with gold and decorated with cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, possibly alluding to the beauty of the Garden of Eden. The room was lit by 10 large menorahs, 5 on each side of the room, that were constantly burning, and narrow windows on each side of the top of the room. On the right side of the room was located the table of showbread, which had 12 large flat pita-like loaves. The priests ate and then replaced the showbread every Sabbath, similar to our weekly partaking of the communion or sacramental bread. Breaking bread and sharing a meal with someone in ancient times represented that you were at peace with them and was a sign of brotherhood, love, and forgiveness. Directly in front of the Holy of Holies was the altar of incense. The altar was similar to the altar of sacrifice in that it had a square footprint and also had 4 horns, 1 on each of the corners. However, on the altar of sacrifice was burned the flesh of animals, while upon the altar of incense burned a sweet combination of incenses. The incense burning before the veil of the temple represented the prayers of the saints ascending to God before the veil, a reminder that before we can enter God's presence, our lives, prayers, and actions must become a sweet savor unto the Lord. Only the high priest was able to enter the Holy of Holies, and only on 1 day a year, the Day of Atonement. Before entering, the high priest passed through a beautifully embroidered veil woven from purple, red, blue, and white threads. The colors were the same as used in the ephod and breastplate of the clothing of the high priest, minus the gold thread. Embroidered on the veil were cherubim, who symbolically guarded the dwelling place of God. As the high priest passed through the veil, he had to pass these angels, who, like in the Garden of Eden, guarded the way back to the presence of the Lord. Upon entering the Holy of Holies, you would find that the room is in the shape of a perfect cube, being 20 cubits wide, long, and tall. The walls were likewise overlaid with gold and decorated with cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers. 2 large cherubim flanked the Ark of the Covenant, which was in the center of the room, with their wings stretching from one side of the room to the other. This room is where the presence of the Lord would dwell, and represented the final goal and destiny of all Israel. Solomon's temple was not only a landmark for the city of Jerusalem, but more importantly, the dwelling place of the Lord. The layout represented Israel's progression back into God's presence, and was designed to teach Israel that it was only through the infinite sacrifice of the sinless Messiah that they could once again enjoy the presence of the Lord. a sacrifice that would be performed on a cross only a short distance from this holy mountain.
All right. I think that is really interesting. I hope you enjoyed that. Last but not least, in Solomon's, oh, I was going to mention really quickly that I had a second coloring page for you. If you got this one done, you could have moved on to this one of the Solomon built a temple. And my hope is that at the end of your small group time, you can share your images with one another. Back to the story. Solomon is now later in his life, and even though he's a story that's filled with God's great blessings of wisdom and this temple that is being built, we know that the king who had it all ended up making some really poor choices at the end of his life. And so the end of the story is kind of sad, actually. Solomon succumbs to many sinful behaviors. Solomon has many wives. He loves his wives, but those wives in turn lead him to idol worship. And eventually, Solomon, his love turns from God into these other idols. And so it's kind of ending to Solomon's life. Yet it's good for us to know this part of the story, and the story, of course, continues on. And so I encourage you in your small group time to continue to have good discussion around this great King Solomon, and I wish you many blessings in your evening together. See you next time.